So the next piece of our lecture is on operant conditioning, and it's very, very important to understand that operant conditioning, now we're dealing with a behavior and its consequences. We're linking a stimulus and a response, not pairing two stimuli together, right? So when we think of operant conditioning, it's stimulus response or behavior consequence more than stimulus learning. Now, Thorndike was a professor, a researcher at Columbia University, and he's one of the early pioneers in behaviorism and, in particular, operant conditioning. Now, we're going to say that Skinner is going to receive credit as the father of operant conditioning or the founding father. But if Skinner is the founding father, then Thorndike is like the grandfather. Now, I will tell you, because you may come across this at a later point in time, Thorndike's contributions to learning and behaviorism are well appreciated. However, historically, he demonstrated both racism, sexism, and anti Semitism to the point where about a decade ago, they removed his name from one of the halls of Columbia University. So there at Columbia, there used to be something called Thorndike Hall, but because all of this came to light, they removed it because it wasn't a good example of, you know, inclusivity. But that aside, we have to talk about his research. We have to talk about what he demonstrated as it relates to learning. So he designed these puzzle boxes. Now, puzzle boxes they're not exactly puzzles, but they're peach crates which he put cats in. And the goal was for the cat to solve how to get out of this peach crate. And there was a lever that they could move with their paw to open up, and it would move the latch, and then the door would open. And then on the outside of this box, there would be food, right? And the cat would eat the food, and eventually the cat would learn, okay, this is what I did in order to get out. Now, in Thorndike's day, there was a question whether animals were showing flashes of insight, meaning that light bulb moment or that aha moment, or whether or not they were learning through trial and error. And based on Thorndike's research, it was discovered that uh, they were learning through gradual processes or trial and error, because when the cats were put back in the puzzle box, if they had that flash of insight, they would immediately go to what happened that allowed them to get out. And that's not what happened, right? It was a gradual curve down. So if we were to look at his principles, right? So he talked about this concept called the law of effect, right? So learning is controlled by its consequences. So if a behavior or response leads to something desirable or satisfying or pleasant, then you're going to do that behavior again. If the behavior was not not coupled with a desirable outcome, so you do the behavior and something uncomfortable or unpleasant happens, you're going to be less likely to do it. So remember the law of adaptive hedonism, right? We seek pleasure and want to avoid pain, right? So in this case, yeah, if the behavior leads to a pleasant outcome, you're going to repeat it. If it leads to an unpleasant outcome, you're not going to repeat it. All right. So here is the graph when we look at time in the puzzle box to escape. In the beginning, it might take around 4 minutes, right? So this is in seconds. So 240 seconds is roughly 4 minutes. But as they're practicing and getting more opportunities to get out, right? That's on the x-axis. The time to get out gets quicker and quicker. But remember, Thorndike was answering a question whether learning occurs instantaneously with these light bulb moments. So let's say the light bulb moment happened here. It should immediately drop down here and the graph should kind of flatline down here, but it didn't. So this gradual process suggests that learning took place on a trial and error process. Now, this is an example of his puzzle box. You could see there's a string, there's a latch. When they push the lever, the latch would lift, the door would open, the cat would be able to get out. And then they would be met with food. Now, the food was a very important part of this because that's a desirable consequence of getting out, which made the cat more motivated to keep trying to get out. So if we were to look at the puzzle boxes, let me pull that video up for you and show you what that looked like.
How is a new skill learned? That was a question which began to fascinate Thorndike. To answer it, he built some ingenious puzzle boxes from which cats could only escape by operating latches. And in you go. Cat appears to be very clever in engineering its escape, solving the problem with a deftly placed paw and a push of its nose. Thorndike didn't believe that an animal, even a clever cat, understands the consequences of its behavior. When he placed a cat in the puzzle box for the first time, Thorndike was unable to see any evidence of flashes of insight. The successful actions appeared first by chance. He proved that the apparent cleverness arose by trial and error, and used graphs to measure the rate of learning. A well-practiced cat quickly recalls the actions that help it escape to its reward of food. An action brings a reward. Thorndike believed that that action becomes stamped into the mind. In his thesis, he explained further his ideas about learning, that behavior changes because of its consequences. He called this his law of effect, which explained how even wild creatures develop new habits.
So, I mean, there are several important pieces of this video, right? So you see the principle of the law of effect, behaviors that led to a desirable outcome were replicated. The behaviors that led to an undesirable outcome were not going to be replicated. So that's one thing. The a second thing was the importance of the learning process, right? So learning is gradual, right? Especially in most animal models, it starts with trial and error. And you saw that one cat kind of moving its head almost as if it's trying to break through the slats of the puzzle box, right? And in the end, eventually they realize they gotta push the lever, right, the rotating wood, and then push the string to lift the pin up. And then on the other side, you'll see that the dish had food. Now you might ask yourself, well, why was there so little food in in the dish? The answer is, if you're going to do repeat trials, you want to keep them motivated to work. So in many animal research studies, you naturally feed the animal to about 80% of his expected food intake. And then the other 20% they work for. And I put work in quotes. So whatever experiment they're doing, they're still going to eat 100% of their daily intake, but they have to do a behavior to get that food. And notice it's that behavior that leads to the consequence, right? So there are a lot of things to react to Thorndike. All right. So, but it's Skinner who really popularized operant conditioning. And to be a founder of an idea doesn't mean you're the first person to come up with the idea. One of the reasons why I talked to you about Thorndike is Thorndike, his work occurred about 30, 40 years prior to Skinner. So the idea that we say Skinner is the founder of operant conditioning, he's not the originator of the idea. He's the person who packaged it, marketed it, popularized it, and made it mainstream. That is Skinner's claim to fame. So if we were to look at operant conditioning as a definition, so we know what conditioning is, right? So conditioning is learning. Anytime you hear the word conditioning, that means learning. But operant, so the root of operant means to operate. So a behavior is either increased or decreased by its consequences, right? So it's going to be increased when it's reinforced, as was the case with uh, Thorndike's cats. But if there was a punishment paradigm, then it's going to decrease that behavior, right? And it's important to understand that we can shape or alter behavior through reinforcement and punishment. Now, in general, reinforcers work better than punishers, but that doesn't mean punishers aren't part of the picture. Now, Skinner did a lot of work with animals as well. So he did work with rats, he did work with pigeons, and he would have them do certain behaviors to get food. So if it were rats, they would have to press a bar, a lever, in order to get food. And he would set a contingency. They had to press it X number of times or X number of times on average, or the number of times would change. And I'll explain that in a minute. But in order to get the food, though, the rat still had to press the bar. In Pavlov's experiment, there was no behavior needed to get the response, right? It was just by pairing the two stimuli together, it happened. Here, the consequence will not occur unless you do the behavior, right? So we talked about reinforcers. They're going to strengthen the behavior that follows. In pigeons, he would have them peck at like a screen with different shapes in order to get food. And when they did, the hopper would open and then they would get their grains of food. Now, shaping is a process to guide a behavior towards a goal. So if you were trying to engage in some kind of behavior modification, let's say a weight loss journey, right? That's pretty common. And you wanted to shape your behavior, right? You might start pretty flexible and you might say, if you go to the gym once a week and work out for a minimum of 30 minutes, you're going to get such and such reward. And then what's going to happen as you get in a rhythm of going to the gym, you're going to up the requirement. You're going to say no longer will you get a reward for 1 time per week. Now you're going to need to go to the gym twice a week to get this reward, and then 3 times a week. And then you might continue to add other contingencies. But notice what we're doing. We started out low and we worked our way gradually towards the goal of, let's say, going to the gym 5 times a week, right? And working out. And then maybe we have some weight loss goals connected to it as well. So if you lose 20 pounds, then you get X reward. When you hit 30 pounds, you get Y reward. When you hit 40 pounds, you get another reward, right? So it's sequential. But notice as we're working with the organism, we're increasing the expectation. And that's what shaping is. You're guiding behavior towards a desired goal. Now, I said to you that he worked with pigeons and rats. And with the rats, they had to press a lever, a bar. And when they press the bar, let's say they had to press a bar 10 times. So if you look on the right, there's the lever. After the 10th time, food would come out. Now, you see where it says light and speaker? Let's say we wanted to train them to only press the bar after the light flashes. So we might have a sound happen. They press the lever, but nothing occurs. The light flashes, they press the lever, food comes out. And we continue this paradigm until they realize that only when the light flashes are they supposed to press the lever. So there are pretty cool things we can do to teach learning. Now, in general, you're going to hear the concept of reinforcement and punishment. And this is a very important concept both in the animal model, but also when we're dealing with human beings as well. So reinforcement refers to any behavior that leads to an increase in responses. So, or any consequence, better yet, that leads to increasing behavior. So reinforcement, summarize, increases behavior. Punishment is any consequence or event that decreases behavior. So reinforcement increases, punishment decreases. Now, there are terms positive and negative. And when you hear the word positive, I want you to think of presenting a stimulus. When you hear the word negative, I want you to think of removing a stimulus. Now, there are 2 kinds of stimuli you can present or remove, either desirable or undesirable. So positive reinforcement, listen to the definition, increases the probability of a behavior or response by presenting a desirable stimulus. So if you clean up your room, I will give you ice cream. Well, we're assuming that the child likes ice cream, and by presenting the child with ice cream, that's going to motivate them to clean the room more, right? Or I'll give you an allowance, right? So maybe it's not ice cream, but it's money. Negative reinforcement, again, you're going to increase the likelihood of a behavior, but now negative means to remove a stimulus. So how do we increase a behavior by removing something? Well, we make it something that's really annoying. And by removing it, it motivates you to do it. And the best example is seatbelts in cars, right? So if you don't have your seatbelt on, the alarm bell is going to ring, ding, 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 ding. And it's annoying. It's aversive. So when you put the seatbelt on, what happens? The sound goes away. we remove that annoying or aversive stimulus. We take it away. And what does that do for you? It makes you more likely to put on your seatbelt. So we could increase the likelihood of a behavior by presenting a desirable stimulus or removing an undesirable stimulus. Now, punishment, the goal is to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. So when we're saying we want to decrease the likelihood of a behavior, positive punishment, again, positive just means to present a stimulus. It doesn't necessarily mean it's good, but now we're presenting an undesirable or aversive stimulus to decrease behavior. Now, we will talk about corporal punishment as a mechanism of punishment and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing and the research on it separately. But let's imagine that a person skips their curfew, they come home late, and they get a spanking. Now, you're presenting an undesirable stimulus to that child, right? You're by hitting them or spanking them, they don't like that pain. Remember, we seek pleasure, avoid pain. So the intention of presenting that consequence is to decrease the likelihood of them skipping curfew. So you skip curfew, I spanked you, therefore you're going to be less likely to skip curfew in the future because you did not like that aversive stimulus. You did not like that, right? So that's positive punishment. Not good. It's just merely presenting a stimulus, an undesirable or aversive stimulus. Negative punishment is also referred to as timeout. If we want to get a person to stop doing something, we could take something away from them. So instead of the parents spanking the child, they could say, okay, you skipped curfew. Now I'm taking away your cell phone or I'm taking away your car. And by taking away something that's important or desirable to them, we're taking that away. They don't want to lose it in the future. So they're going to be less likely to skip curfew. So positive, present a stimulus, negative, remove a stimulus. Reinforcement increases behavior, punishment decreases the behavior. All right. So if we were to use this, let's do a quick quiz. The first one I gave you. If you fasten your seatbelt in response to the seatbelt alarm, that is negative reinforcement. Now I want to go to you. If you clean your room, you'll get to go out and play. What is that? If you clean your room, you'll get to go out and play. Anyone?
An ultimatum?
No, but using the paradigm of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment.
Isn't that negative reinforcement?
No, it's
Oh,
positive
it's
reinforcement.
positive.
First one is negative reinforcement. The second one is positive. Think about it. If you clean your room, you will get to go outside. As a parent, do you want them to increase or decrease cleaning their room?
Increase.
Increase, right? So cleaning the room is the behavior we want to increase. So we're using some form of a reinforcement paradigm, right? Now, you will get to go outside. Let's think about through the lens of the child now. Does the child want to go outside and play? Is that desirable or undesirable?
Desirable.
And are we presenting that or taking that away? We're presenting it. Yeah. So we're presenting it. We're saying you get to go outside if you clean your room. So we're presenting something that's desirable to the child with the intent of getting the child to increase their cleaning of the room. That's why the second bullet point is positive reinforcement. Now I'm going to play with the words a little bit. If you clean your room, you will no longer have to stay inside. Do we want cleaning the room to increase or decrease? Do we want the kid to clean the room or not?
To clean the room.
Right, so we want to increase this behavior, so we know we're dealing with reinforcement, and then we say you will no longer have to stay inside. Now the kid is inside and we're removing that restriction. Do you think the kid likes to stay inside?
No.
Or did this kid, as we saw earlier, want to go out and play? This kid wants to go out, but we're saying if you clean your room, we'll remove this thing that's undesirable. So bullet point 3, what is that? We're taking away an undesirable stimulus to increase behavior. We're removing a stimulus to increase behavior.
Positive reinforcement.
Nope. Again,
Oh.
positive, you're presenting a stimulus. Negative, you're taking away. But it is similar to the first bullet point. It's negative reinforcement. Now, I used bullet point 1 and 3 as the same because I didn't want you to say, okay, well, I've answered that. I'm eliminating it. Bullet point 1 is negative reinforcement. Bullet point 2 is positive reinforcement. Bullet point 3 is once again negative reinforcement. Now, here's the inverse. If you don't clean your room, now this is a behavior. Do we want them to increase or decrease not cleaning their room? And I know there's a negative here. So we have to convert it in our head. So do we want them to increase or decrease with a messy room?
Decrease.
So decreasing a behavior is what kind of paradigm? Go back. What paradigm decreases the frequency of a response?
Negative punishment.
Okay, so punishment, right? So we're using a punishment paradigm here now, but here we're saying you will have to stay inside. So we're presenting a consequence of staying inside. So here, this is actually positive punishment because we're presenting an undesirable consequence, right? If you don't do this, they're all contingencies. If you don't clean your room, you're going to have to stay inside, right? So this is considered positive punishment. Okay. Now, when we talk about reinforcers, we also need to understand there are different kinds of reinforcers. There are primary and secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are inherently reinforcing. So if you have an organism that's hungry and you give them food, in the case of Skinner's work with the pigeons and the rats, giving them food, those are primary reinforcers. It's satisfying a basic need. We also have, though, something called conditioned reinforcers or secondary reinforcers. Now, this doesn't directly satisfy a need, but it can be converted into some kind of primary reinforcer. So a secondary reinforcer might be giving someone who's hungry money. Well, can they eat the money? Maybe, but that's not the best use of money. So we understand that money is associated with the ability to buy food. So because it's connected with a primary reinforcer, it works. That's why allowance works, because kids can take that money. They could buy candy, they could buy video games, they could buy makeup, whatever it is that they're into. So that's a conditioned reinforcer, secondary. But understand it's secondary because it's not directly reinforcing. It's not, doesn't satisfy a basic need. It has to be converted. Now, the Premack principle. The Premack principle is that you set a contingency where a person has to do a less desirable activity in order to do a more desirable activity. Meaning, if you want ice cream, you have to eat your vegetables, right? So in order to be able to do the ice cream eating behavior, you got to do something you don't want. So first you do this, and that'll be a consequence. That's oftentimes referred to as grandma's rule or Premack principle. If you eat your vegetables, you can have ice cream, right? But you got to eat your vegetables first. So we make you do something you don't want to do as much in order to be able to do something you want to do more. Okay. Similar to if you clean your room, you'll get to go outside, right? So that was a Premack principle at play there too. Now, a gradient of reinforcement. Understand, we talked about the law of temporal contiguity. The more time that passes between the behavior and the consequence, the weaker learning is going to take place. Now, we'll talk about corporal punishment. I keep saying we're going to talk about corporal punishment and the research around it. But one of the things that parents do that's wrong is they say, wait until your father gets home, let's say. Now, the kid misbehaved, and 4, 5, 6 hours passes, and then they get the punishment. By the time they're punished, they forgot what they did wrong. So the longer the delay between behavior and consequence, harder it is for the reinforcement or punishment learning to take place. All right. So we also have this concept called schedules of reinforcement. But you know what? I'm going to stop there briefly because I know I have to give you your break. We'll talk about schedules of reinforcement in its own recording.